Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar where we'll be taking an introductory look at the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme, or ESOS, and approaches for complying with it. My name is Stephen Kennett and I look after the Energy and Carbon Management channel here at 2 Degrees. I'm delighted to welcome our presenters today. From Carbon Clear we have Henry Garthwaite, who has a wealth of experience in the carbon and energy sector. And we're also very fortunate to be joined by Martin Adams, ESOS team leader in the Energy Efficiency Deployment Office at the Department of Energy and Climate Change. Today's presentations will last for around 35 to 40 minutes, which will leave us with 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end. Before we begin, I'd just like to remind everyone that you can submit questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Simply type in your question and press send, and then we'll wait till the end before answering as many as we can. As an aside, if you should have any technical issues during the webinar, please use the chat box on the right-hand side to send me a message, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So without any further delay, I'd like to hand over to Henry, who will get us started with today's webinar. So Henry, over to you.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on ESOS. We are delighted to be able to run this webinar today. This is one of a series of events that we've got about ESOS, so it's great to be able to run a webinar and have lots of people joining us for that. My name is Henry Garthwaite, as has already been mentioned, and I am from Carbon Clear. We know that ESOS is important to lots of organisations, and so thought that it was well worthwhile getting somebody from the ESOS team to be able to present to us as well, and we're delighted that Martin is able to join us to talk us through ESOS and what you need to know. For the rest of the agenda, I'm then going to briefly be going through approaches to compliance, hopefully to start the thinking for you around the way to actually approach this rather than just understand what it is. And then in the last section, we want to make sure that organisations are thinking about how they can make the most from the scheme rather than just making sure they tick the box to say that they comply. So without any further ado, what I would like to do is hand straight over to our guest speaker, Martin from DEC.
Thank you very much for that introduction. So ESOS, the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme, the background context of this was the EU's Energy Efficiency Directive, which came into force in 2012, and one of the articles of that directive requires every member state to introduce a mandatory energy auditing scheme for large enterprises. And the main reason for that is because there's clearly an environmental need. Actually implementing energy efficiency measures is far more cost effective than new generation, and there's lots of potential out there which is waiting to be exploited. So ESOS is good for the environment, it helps meet carbon targets, helps reduce energy demand, it's good for businesses because it increases profitability and productivity, and there's been lots of research lately around the multiple benefits of energy efficiency and that effect on business and the wider economy and the environment. And ESOS, the way we've designed it, is intended to be a tool to help businesses, to help provide a framework for energy managers, allowing those who are already leading the way on this, already undertaking good energy management practice to incorporate that and use that to comply with the scheme, whilst also driving forward compliance with this, driving forward energy management, effective energy management practice in organisations which aren't there yet. So just to give you a very quick overview on a page of what ESOS is. ESOS is a mandatory requirement which requires organisations who are in scope of the schemes to do three things. It requires them to measure their total energy use, to identify cost-effective opportunities to save energy, and then just make a compliance notification to say that they have complied to a scheme administrator. What is not a requirement is actually implementing the findings from the audits, but clearly businesses will get out what they put in. You will only actually make the savings and benefit from the scheme, and we do think there are significant benefits, which I'll come on to, if you do implement those savings. So essentially you are in scope if you are a large undertaking in the UK or part of a corporate group containing a large undertaking in the UK. And so if there is a qualification date on the 31st of December 2014, and if you meet that qualification criteria set out on the slide at that time, you will be in scope of the scheme. And then you will have until the 5th of December 2015 to comply with the scheme. But there are lots of ways we have built flexibility in to allow organisations to take advantage of good practice to comply using activities that they've done over the last 4 years already. So I'll come on to that. So 5th of December sounds very close. It's important to start thinking about the scheme now and how you intend to comply, and also then achieve the benefits from the scheme from the energy efficiency opportunities identified. But actually, there is that scope for organisations which have already undertaken sort of effective energy management practice to build that into their compliance approach. What we don't want is to have needless duplication and red tape when there's stuff that's good practice already being done out there. And the key point is actually, and because of this is a significant new requirement, it affects around 10,000 organisations in the UK. We have been very keen, given tight deadlines, we've been sort of working with the grain of business to try developing a scheme which focuses on those outcomes, focuses on those benefits, and focuses on helping businesses achieve the energy efficiency potentials that they have, which is still outstanding. And so that leads us on to 3 core principles which have been sort of fed back to us by business, and which we then intend to follow and have tried to follow in setting up the ESOS regulations, which came into force in July. And these 3 messages are keeping the scheme simple and understandable, but also making it meaningful for businesses. So organisations want something which is straightforward to comply with, focuses on allowing and enabling energy managers to do their jobs rather than getting bogged down in bureaucracy, but also has that sufficient nuances for them to design their own implementation approach in a way which works for their business. The way we've sought to achieve this is by having some core principles and core requirements laid out in legislation, and then having these accompanied by some detailed guidance. And a lot of you, if you haven't got, there's a link to that guidance further on in these slides, but if you haven't looked at it yet, there is very detailed guidance online about how to comply, which answers a lot of questions, and there is also a help desk being run by the Environment Agency, so there's lots of advice and support out there if you do have queries to help you comply. The second key principle is about avoiding duplication in existing regulation and requirements. So where businesses already are measuring information, they're gathering data under the CRC scheme or the EU ETS, all of that can be then transplanted. That activity will help support ESOS compliance. The scheme is built to be flexible and allow that. But also where organisations have already undertaken energy audits or are sort of partaking in schemes like they've got ISO 50001 or they have the Carbon Trust standard. The scheme is designed to allow those sort of activities to be used to support compliance. So ISO 50001 can be used as a route to compliance. That's something that was set out in the EU Energy Efficiency Directive. But also where organisations have got audits which are being carried out perhaps under the Carbon Trust standard or CMARS or those other sort of schemes already in place, or just energy audits carried out by private companies which have been meet the minimum requirements of ESOS and have been done over the past 4 years, those can also be used to support compliance. So we don't want to make you do things twice. We want to allow organisations that flexibility to build on the good practice already. And the final key point is about minimising the costs and minimising the administrative burdens on doing the audits. And this has been particularly, allowing flexibility around the number of site visits for an audit. If you're a large retailer with 1,000 stores, then more often not, you'll have a model with maybe, you've got 20, 30 types of different store that you could audit and then draw those sort of recommendations and make read across to the whole of the site as a whole and across the business. We allow organisations within the scheme to use in-house teams, either where they've got somebody who's suitably qualified in-house, or they could have in-house people who don't hold a qualification but actually have the skills and competence, and then get that externally verified to allow them to sort of meet the requirements in a cost-effective way. And the aim of that is the directive requires audits to be at least overseen by someone who's qualified, but that could be someone in-house, it could be someone external. There's lots of routes there for organisations to choose the best approach for them. And I'll come on to that sort of point about qualification and what that means in practice in a couple of minutes in my presentation. But if those are the key messages that we've got when listening to business about how to design the scheme, we do have one sort of message back to business from government, which is there is significant energy efficiency potential out there. ESOS is estimated to have a 1.6 billion net benefit to the UK over the next 15 years, and the vast majority of that will be felt by businesses through reductions in their bill savings. That benefit is felt by, it's calculated as an estimate on the basis that companies would save on average 0.7% on their energy bill per company in scope of the scheme. Now, actually, what was interesting is when we published details of the scheme and published our final impact assessment on which that calculation was based, we actually had messages coming back from various media reports you might have seen yourself saying, actually, companies saying, well, we save far more than that. So we've been conservative and in our estimates thinking that the savings will be relatively modest, but what it really points to is their significant benefit. You will only get that benefit if you then take up the recommendations, take up the energy efficiency opportunities identified in your organisations. And so that's the real driver for actually making this scheme work for your business, and that's what we're aiming to achieve. I will give a whistle-stop tour of the sort of core policy requirements for ESOS. And there's a few bullet points summarising these at the end of the slides. But as I said, there is comprehensive guidance available online and from the Environment Agency and from their help desk, and so that is an important port of call and route for you to use as you help determine how best to comply within your organisation. So, as I mentioned, ESOS applies to organisations which are considered large undertakings, i.e. not SMEs in the UK, or are part of a group which includes a large undertaking in the UK. So those are defined by requirements of a different EU directive, different EU recommendation. But essentially, if your organisation employs 250 or more people, you are in scope of the scheme. And even if your organisation employs fewer than 250 people, if it's an undertaking, if it's engaged in economic or trade kind of activity, then if it surpasses that level of turnover and the sort of balance sheet total set out on the slide, then you will be in scope of the scheme too. The only exemptions are organisations which aren't undertaking any sort of economic activities or trades, or public bodies, as defined by if they are required to comply with the public contracts regulations. And so those are the only routes for exemption. If you are part of a corporate group, then, and that group includes at least one large undertaking, then the entire group is in scope of the scheme. And again, that's sort of mapping onto the EU requirements and definitions for an SME organisation. The way ESOS works in relation to corporate groups is by borrowing from the CRC model. So the scheme will target the highest parent company in the first place within a corporate group, but with the potential for that group to disaggregate for compliance purposes. And I think some feedback we got from industry, we had an expert advisory panel which met and helped steer this, as well as the formal consultation outreach we did. And one of the key messages is, well, actually that was a painful process for the CRC, but it's a process that companies have now been through and understood, so please don't invent something different this time. So we're trying to build on that and build on the fact that things which are now understood and recognised and organisations are already doing to comply with other existing schemes, or many organisations are anyway. The ESOS assessment at its heart is a four-step process. So first of all, organisations must measure their total energy consumption. And this is holistic. The directive defines that very widely. This isn't just electricity and gas. It is all energy consumption within an organisation. Organisations must then audit at least 90% of that energy consumption. That could be covered via an ISO 50001 system, via energy audits, via display energy certificates or Green Deal assessments, or via, as I mentioned, schemes such as the Carbon Trust Standard, provided that they're done in such a way that meets the minimum requirements of the directive and the ESOS regulations, which I'll come on to. And what is important, though, is organisations can deduct any unconsumed supplies. So if you have tenants and the energy is sub-metered, you don't need to audit that. That's the tenant's responsibility if they're in scope of the scheme. It doesn't cover your supply chain. If you have contracted out your transport, for instance, then that is out of scope. It's a responsibility of that transport company if they're in scope of the scheme. But essentially, ESOS is holistic. It is about buildings, industrial processes, and transport. It's a very broad reach in the EU directive. The audits themselves, as I said, there's detailed guidance about this available, and that's linked to one of the Environment Agency's ESOS website. but in essence, the regulatory requirements are relatively broad. So audits have to be based on at least 12 months data for energy consumption profiles. There is a comply or explain principle there, so if data is unavailable, if there's a reasonable justification for using less, then that is allowable. Audits must come up with cost-effective recommendations. So it's not enough to say you could save some money if you change that light fitting or what have you, installed LEDs. There actually needs to be a costings process to help prioritise those efficiencies, opportunities identified. So saying you could save X amount by doing this with a payback period of whatever. And the point in that is actually that, again, those should be, where appropriate, life cycle cost analysis, so you do get that full picture. Again, that was one of the requirements set out in the directive. And finally, the key thing which ESOS relies on for its effectiveness is audits must be undertaken or overseen by a qualified lead assessor. So there are a range of energy professional sort of recognised standards or qualifications in the UK at the moment. And rather than reinventing the wheel with these and inventing some new scheme, what we have sought to do is actually map onto those existing qualifications. So at present, the Environment Agency are running a process to approve registers of energy professionals which are held by professional bodies already, or which professional bodies develop. So there's been around 18 bodies which have several thousand energy professionals already on them who are seeking approval for and recognition for these qualifications they already have. And those include the likes of IEMA or the Energy Institute, the Energy Managers Association. Or said there's a range of these bodies who are keen on having registers of their members recognised as being members who are suitably competent to actually carry out and oversee audits and ensure that they're valuable, they're comprehensive, that they actually are accurate, and that the quality of the audits is safeguarded, so businesses are getting reliable and accurate information. Once the opportunities have been identified and evaluated, so going around doing site visits, carrying out the data gathering and the analysis and costing the recommendations, these must be reviewed by a board-level director. And one of the key bits of feedback we got during our consultation from energy managers is lots of energy managers know that they know that there's opportunities there. They know that they're confident about the savings, but they struggle to get that board level engagement, and that's one of the key things. ESOS is a tool for sort of getting that information into organisations at the right level to help inform investment decisions. So there is a requirement for a board level director to review the sort of audit recommendations and the potential savings. And then finally, organisations have to notify the scheme administrator that they have complied, and that is a very high-level notification. There isn't lots of data to be added in. We've aimed to keep a simple form, which we've been testing with a small group of stakeholders, and that's had positive feedback so far. Unlike schemes like the CRC, just to be clear, there's no requirement to register by the qualification date. The only requirement is to actually notify of compliance. The Environment Agency or the scheme administrator have a range of tools, which means they'll be able to identify companies that should be in scope, and for purposes of sort of following up on compliance. And they will actually be writing a targeted letter out to every company that they have identified so far who will be in scope over the autumn. But so there's no need to pre-register or register before notifying of compliance. It's worth sort of going into a bit more detail about the different ways organisations comply. I've touched on several of these already, but the point in ESOS is, as I said, to make it flexible for organisations to be able to use different tools, different approaches to suit their means and achieve the energy efficiency opportunity. So in addition to carrying out energy audits, which is at the sort of core of the policy, organisations can comply via having an ISO 50001 energy management system. If an organisation is totally covered by an ISO 50001 system, all of its energy use is covered by it, then that organisation can simply comply with the scheme and say, notify the Environment Agency that it is covered, provided that system is certified by a sort of national accreditation body, either by a sort of either a certifying body overseen by UCAS or a certification body overseen by another EU member state national accreditation body, or one which is registered internationally with the international accreditation form. So basically ensuring that there's a legitimate sort of certification process. Other routes which meet the minimum requirements of the ESOS in respect of buildings alone, so it wouldn't actually cover entire organisations' consumption generally, but if an organisation just has buildings, say no transport, nothing else, then they could comply by using display energy certificates or non-domestic Green Deal assessments. Again, those sort of tick the minimum requirements of the directive. And then finally, there's sort of, as I mentioned previously, previous auditing activity. Any activity carried out since sort of December 2011 will be able to be used to comply with the first round of ESOS. And that could be energy audits, which meet the minimum requirements of ESOS audits. Those audits could be done as standalone audits. They could be done as in-house business cases and assessments as part of business as usual activity, or they could be done for an organisation aiming to sort of gain a standard like the Carbon Trust Standard or CMARS or one of those other approaches which exist there in industry. Where they have used those audits, there's just a need for a qualified lead assessor to sort of review that process and review that compliance to make sure that the organisation has complied. And as I said, that could be an in-house person who's qualified, who belongs to one of these registers of professionals who's being set up, or it could be someone external. I think there has been a lot to take in there. And I said I've sort of talked about this, and this slide pack will be circulated. So these key requirements, as I've set out here, this isn't a memoir for you when the sort of slides are circulated. But the key point is there is a lot of information out there online, which on the Environment Agency website, where you can get guidance, where you can get support from the Environment Agency help desk with any queries you have. And finally, the key point is for lots of organisations which are already measuring their energy under CRC, under CCAs, under EU ETS, all of that data helps you comply with ESOS. This is not starting from a stop-start. There is a lot of activity out there which is already being covered to help support compliance. And so it's important that I think the key point for any organisation should be to say, what have I done already? What have I got in place which could either be used to sort of demonstrate compliance to some extent or in totality, if, say, you've sort of got something which covers over 90% of your energy consumption already, or alternatively, what schemes are already in place, and then you can start filling in the gaps. So the point is to, as I said, take advantage of activity organisations are already doing rather than creating something brand new. The links to the ESOS guidance are there on this slide here. And also then, if after having looked at that guidance there are questions, areas you're unsure about, then there is also the Environment Agency's ESOS help desk, where they'll be awaiting queries. The slide said any questions, but I know that we will actually sort of pause questions at the end, as Stephen said before. So I will now hand back to Penry for the second part of the presentation. Thank you very much.
We want to make... Hello, this is Henry, just checking everybody's there. Sorry, I think I may have been on mute. Thank you very much, Martin, for that. Really good to get lots of clarity and understanding as to the feeling behind the scheme, and that it is much more aimed at encouraging than anything else. Thank you, everybody, also for all of your questions. Please do keep sending those in. Our aim is to try and help you get more clarity about ESOS and how it might be implemented, or how compliance might be implemented within your organisation. So that is great. What we will do now is move on to have a look at the two areas I mentioned earlier. The first one is what the various approaches to compliance, and this is from a practical perspective. Carbon Clear is actually out helping organisations today look at ESOS and what they might need to do. And then secondly, how you can make the most from the scheme, depending on the approach that you take. Just as a brief introduction, for those of you who don't know Carbon Clear, we have been around for quite some time, almost since certainly the start of the international carbon markets. We've got operations around the globe, although the vast majority of our team is in the UK. We do work with some very large organisations and help them through a range of things, anything from energy efficiency work through to carbon strategies, reporting and compliance challenges that organisations have, through to communications and carbon offsetting. In terms of our core focus, though, really we want to help organisations develop a systematic approach to achieving long-term commercial value, and that is principally around managing energy and carbon emissions and enabling organisations to make the most of that via communication. And I'm not going to go through any case studies. There are a number of logos at the bottom of the slide there that you will see for organisations that I'm sure you recognise that we work fairly closely with. But what I do want to do is to look at compliance and those compliance options that Martin has highlighted. As we've already discussed, there are a range of those, and what we thought we would do is just have a quick look at some of them, just to see how they might apply to you. And the next slide actually is taken straight from the deck guide to ESOS. I'm more than happy to let you go off and have a look at that guide. It's a really useful document. And this slide really goes into the detail of what those different schemes mean. What we've tried to do is to simplify that a little bit, principally for this presentation and the series of presentations and workshops that we're doing, but also to help organisations get a quick, clear look at what these different compliance routes might mean. And the one that I'm going to pick up on is ISO 50001. And the principal reason for that is not because, in our view, that if an organisation is going to implement this and be certified to it across the whole organisation, that actually the costs are probably, relatively speaking, higher than an ESOS audit or going out and doing a deck evaluation on individual buildings, but actually more that this, for an organisation to achieve ESOS compliance in a single hit, is that ISO 50001 provides that, but also provides additional value over that. So in many respects, this is a great thing to have a look at to see, as an organisation, where you might want to go if you were to go beyond compliance. In terms of the challenges out there for organisations, it isn't a case of picking one or other of these compliance routes. And as Martin has mentioned, there are lots of other potentially valid equivalent schemes out there. Obviously, all of them will vary in terms of the cost, the time that they actually take to implement, the effort for you, and so on. But if we focus a little bit in on ISO 50001, as I mentioned, hopefully that will give you a good view as to the sorts of things that you should be thinking about regarding compliance and potentially taking things that little bit further. And the key here comes back to the implementation that Martin mentioned. Those are the voluntary aspects, but those are the aspects that are going to deliver value. And just as an example, within the deck documentation, there is an estimate that the average organisation will spend about £6,500 in cost to go through sort of ESOS compliance, go through the audits, data collection, and so on. But an estimate that it will save somewhere in the region of about £35,000 if it looks to implement the cost-effective recommendations that come out of that. So there are undoubtedly some significant savings. So 50001, why? Well, ISO 50001, along with the ISO family of standards, really is about enabling a systematic approach for whatever it is. In this case, it's about continuous improvement of energy performance. And the standard helps to establish and implement and maintain a system within an organization. And this is a structure. It isn't a piece of software. It isn't a mindset. It's a structure for organizations to think through what it is that they're trying to do, in this case, to drive continuous energy reduction. And ISO 50001 is almost unique in the ISO standards, certainly compared to things like ISO 9001 quality management or 14001, where those standards purely look at an improvement in the effectiveness of the system. What ISO 50001 does is it not only requires an improvement in the effectiveness of a system for organizations, but also that it requires an improvement in the results. So it's not just about the process, it's about the resulting energy performance. And we feel that ties very well with ESOS, because this is about where those savings are going to be made and where organizations really are going to benefit from taking ESOS seriously, rather than just looking at it as I've got to comply, how do I do that with the least possible effort? Because fundamentally, that least possible effort is going to mean a lack of savings because of the lack of implementation. So ISO 50001 has a range of components and frameworks, and I'm not going to go through this in any detail. This really is for you to refer back to say, okay, where can I put a tick in boxes for my organization? Can we say that we have got management responsibility documented? Can we say we've got an energy policy? Have we done performance audits? Is there a management review process that is also going on? And there are frameworks within that standard to help an organization do exactly that and implement it. I'm sure lots of you, if you've come across ISO standards, will also be well aware of the Plan, Do, Check and Act acronym, and also the various parts of the standard that relate to that. So that is a quick overview of ISO 50001, and I hope provides you with a little bit of structure, an alternative way to look at ESOS compliance, to say how can we look at energy management to not only get to the point of complying with ESOS, but to take it that step further and to start thinking about taking that voluntary step, which fundamentally is going to be the one that helps the organization save rather than just spend money on energy. The other thing that is worth a quick look is at the compliance routes at the other end of the spectrum. And this really is not to say that these are not worth doing, but to say that it's worth having a look at the impacts and the compliance routes if you were to follow either the DEC assessment route or the Green Deal assessments. And that they do have their own specific regulations. They do have limitations in that both of them will only cover buildings, so they won't cover transport, which is required. They're only available in some parts of the country, and fundamentally they look at energy on a building by buildings basis, and so they don't combine those recommendations, the energy and so on, to ensure that you've got a good overall view for the organization rather than for those individual properties. So when we come back to look at the compliance routes, actually one of the things that I hope comes out of this is that there may be a mix of these routes that you as an organization wish to take. If you are going to take ISO 50001 seriously and go for certification under ISO 50001, great. That, if you can do it for the entire organization, will provide you with compliance for ESOS. And actually not only ESOS, if you also have European operations that are covered by it, it will also cover you for their ESOS equivalents. And each EU country has actually got to set out its own scheme. The UK's is ESOS. But there may well be a mix for any organisation to find the best route for compliance. And this is as a result of things that you may have already done in the past, but also may want to consider in future. And so actually, lots of organisations need to work out whether they are covered by ESOS, and then look at what they've already got. Look at the energy assets that they've already got to put together a list of all of the things that are going to be useful for ESOS. And this is something that I think is unique with this bit of legislation compared to things like the CRC or climate change agreements. In that first time round, you can look at information that may be up to 4 years old. So a key message from us is don't panic about ESOS. It may well be that you've already got a large amount of information that helps you with ESOS, and you've just got to build up those an understanding of those pieces of the jigsaw to then find out what you haven't got. And so the sorts of pieces of the jigsaw you may already have on the energy consumption side are listed there. They don't just include your CRC submission if you are in the CRC, but could include consumption invoices, any annual statements that you've got from suppliers, any invoices for bunkered fuel if you have that, or fuel card statements. On the energy saving side, could include any reviews that you or your team may have done, or that an external consultancy has done, or even potentially that a supplier has come to you with if they have worked with you on a proposal for the implementation of a piece of technology. There are a whole load of areas that you could look back to say, do I have the information that can help me build up a set of the energy saving opportunities within my organisation? And of course the others may be DECs and Green Deal assessments, or the implementation of environmental management systems or energy management systems, as we have already mentioned. So we suggest that organisations actually go back, see what they've already got, understand that, and then they can fill the gaps and build a strategy to either meet or exceed the requirements of ESOS. And this is where lots of organisations are starting to say, let's make the most of this, and rather than just have it as a cost, go a little bit beyond compliance. And for this, really we need to start looking at what that might mean for an organisation. So really there are three key things at Carbon Clear that we see organisations are looking to do when it comes to energy and carbon. The first one is cost savings, and I'm not going to go in detail into the potential cost savings to say these are the things that you as an organisation should be doing. The second is around engagement, and that's engagement of stakeholders, especially employees. And the third is competitive advantage. And as Martin has already mentioned, actually one of the things that ESOS should help you to do is to get in front of your directors. And in this case, you're putting a report in front of them they have to read, because they have to sign it off. It's no different to the published accounts that are may be disclosed by any organisation. A director will want to make sure that they know and understand what they mean. And so this really is a great opportunity for you to make the most of your ambitions, your aims, what it is that you're trying to do for the organisation. When it comes to cost savings, the old mantras still hold true. Having a strategy in place is a really good start. And we've got a strategic approach to energy management that says here are 5 key steps that organizations really should undertake to get those things in place. And as I said, I'm not going to go through the details of exactly what cost savings you should be gaining from implementing what pieces of equipment. But make sure that your team is involved, your management team is involved. Make sure you understand the challenges of the business and also of your energy consumption. Then you can start thinking about what it is you're trying to do, what the targets might be, how to implement those changes across the organization, and make sure that you're getting the feedback to know that those strategies are actually delivering the change you want to achieve. The second on engagement is all about communication and commitment. And one of the areas we've found on engagement is that there are lots of organizations that are helping their employees to do the right sorts of things. The next challenge we see is to understand why they're doing them. And then the third is to try and develop within the team or within your staff the want, the desire to do them as well, because it's not just about understanding or action. It helps enormously if you can have a quorum of people or even all of the team who understand and want to do those sorts of things. And just as an example, if you've got an energy management team, they should already know where they are adding value. The organization should know where you are adding value and where the team is adding value. And if this comes down to supplying those results up to the director who has signed off your ESOS requirement to say, this is what we did last time round, this is how much energy we've saved, this is the cost we have saved, and the value we've added to the business, then that is great. I would expect directors to want to see the results of your activities. And employees may start to want to help if they can become more engaged, if they see what the issues are and can have accountability for them and the rewards and incentives that can be put in place in lots of respects very easily. And lastly, competitive advantage I mentioned. And actually it's not the sort of thing that organizations necessarily see as being of competitive advantage, managing energy. But here are 3 comments that we've had from organizations that we've been talking to, some for quite some time, some much more recently, that directly link savings and energy performance to some really significant potential within the organization, either in terms of the direct savings and the impact that that would have on turnover, or the future value of those businesses. And these are really, this is a theme that we're starting to see more and more of, that there are links to the potential for the business in future and its view on energy management. And just picking up on that middle one, if an organization that runs a portfolio of buildings on behalf of external investors finds that the value of that portfolio is going to drop in future if they can't let those properties, then that is significant, hugely significant. If they can't be let because of their energy performance, and that is something that is becoming more and more likely in future, then that will have a dramatic impact on that portfolio. So these are some very, very direct links between business success and energy management. I'm not saying that's the be-all and end-all, but it is important. So what I hope that we've done through this webinar is that Martin has articulated ESOS, I think, very well, and has shown actually that this legislation is about putting in those initial steps, the sensible steps for the 10,000 organizations or so that are covered. Hopefully you've also seen that an effective strategy actually can help you do more than that, but that communication and commitment needs to be right at the heart of what you are doing. And we see that energy management actually needs to become and needs to continue to be an integral part of company management. So we hope that you will feel the same as a result of this and can start to see the potential that ESOS can provide you with. And what I'd now like to do is open up to Stephen, because I know that there have been a raft of questions that have come through. So, Stephen, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Henry, and thank you, Martin. As Henry mentioned, we've had lots of questions come in, so we'll get through as many as we can in the next 15 minutes. So, Martin, one here maybe you'd like to kick off with, but someone's asking, if a large company has several manufacturing sites in the UK, all of them holding more than 250 staff, do they need to do audits for each site or just a sample?
It would depend on the similarity of sites, and the point in ESOS is actually that a professional auditor, an energy management professional, the lead assessor is able to sort of make those judgments about similarity between sites. If you do have an organisation where there are 3 sites where you can draw comparisons, then that would be a possible approach. But if they're very different, if you can't draw those comparisons across the sites, then clearly that's not going to be route compliant. So the challenge with ESOS when we've been designing the framework is this: 10,000 companies includes a massive array of different organisations. So everything from a large chemicals company through to a law firm, perhaps with a small office and very little else. And so the aim of this is actually really relying on that professional judgment, working with the organisations or either by someone in-house or externally to then make those calls and say, actually, you can sort of draw parallels between these sites, and so that's okay, or perhaps in some cases you might not be able to if you've got 3 manufacturing sites all manufacturing very different things, and that's going to be rather more difficult to do, I would imagine.
Great. Thank you very much, Martin. Henry, somebody here is asking, they work for a large builder and developer, and they're struggling to understand how the requirements of this scheme will fit with their business, as they don't have a portfolio of properties, rather they have a portfolio of projects. So the baseline is constantly moving. So is it necessary or appropriate to use a 1-year baseline for investment decisions, or really is ISO 50001 the route to compliance for them? So it's a kind of 2-part question.
Yes. Thank you for that. I can see a challenge there in the approach, and ISO 50001 may well be a sensible way to go. I would certainly say it's worth looking at the information you've already got, but I quite understand the challenges that you face. In fact, I was talking to a development company not that long ago that faces exactly the same sorts of things, in that quite often they are running portfolios of projects, some of which they are responsible for the energy, some of which subcontractors are, and some of which their clients are. And that is quite a challenge, and I think one of the great things about ESOS is it gives you the flexibility, because you don't have to just do an energy audit over your entire organization with a single 12-month set of data. You can collate data across projects and then report that at the end, and you can collate data across projects at over different periods of time, as long as it is 12 months worth of contiguous data, and you are clear on the information for energy consumption that is yours, that you have to report, and for that which is not yours and is somebody else's responsibility to report, either your subcontractors, and just as an example, if they are bringing equipment on site that uses diesel and they are providing that diesel, then that is their energy to report. But if you are paying for bunkered fuel on site and they just draw off that, then you are going to be reporting that. So there are undoubtedly some challenges there, really, in terms of working out what energy consumption for you and your project is in your scope and what is not. But once you have done that and you know what information you need to be collecting, then our recommendation, as I said, key is don't panic, but I think a subtitle underneath that is as long as you start thinking about and acting on it now. So key recommendation, start collecting the information once you understand what it is that you need. But ISO 50001 is a sensible route for lots of organizations. There is a question about what it is that they are trying to achieve. Certainly if you want to go beyond just the tick in the box for the mandatory parts of ESOS, that is a very sensible route.
Great, thank you, Henry. Martin, a question here for you. How closely does the 12 months data have to align, i.e. a company with 500 sites? Do all the sites have to provide data that is within 1 day or 30 days of each other? Or is it okay just to take 12 months data from each site as an individual?
If each site is being done as sort of separate bits of audits, then it is entirely okay to take data from different sites at different times. The point in the 12 months requirement is we recognise that if we had tried sort of creating very, very defined methodologies, it would have worked for no one at all. So the 12-month data actually comes with a comply or explain principle, allowing some divergence where it is justifiable. So it could be because it's immaterial, it could be because it actually led to the data is not available or it allows matching in other ways. So there is that ability. Again, it comes down to that professional auditor with the skills and experience to make those judgments. So there is that ability to diverge from that as well. Though clearly 12 months is a sort of expectation to take into account seasonal variation.
Thanks, Martin. Another question for you. Someone's asking, we're part of a European group whose head office is in London. Will they have a duty for ESOS, or will we as the operations and manufacturing company have the duty to comply?
The way this works multinationally is, as with many things, different bits of EU legislation, something which is complex, I'm afraid, for multinational companies. So the ESOS scheme only extends to the UK. We cannot sort of say that complies with activities in other jurisdictions. So the head office is in the UK, and if they are large within the UK themselves, then they would need to comply with ESOS for the UK. Other member states have other schemes. They are broadly similar in terms of, for instance, France, you've got a scheme with the de minimis and endorsing different routes to compliance. But each member state will have its own slightly different approach to implementing the directive. I think that's something which the EU is going to be looking at in the longer term about how they can encourage and increase standardisation and that sort of cross-referencing, but it's not there yet. And that is just to do with the nature of different member states of their own sovereignty and jurisdiction. What I can say is that ESOS does operate the same way across the UK. We have the agreement with devolved administrations that there is a single UK-wide scheme, and that in itself, although it seems not very obvious and sensible for companies, isn't the case in all member states. So if you're in Belgium, for instance, I think they have 4 different schemes operating according to their federal system.
Great, thank you, Martin.
Do you mind if I just add in that what I think Martin has pointed out there is some differences, but what we do know is that this all fundamentally has been driven at its inception by the EU, and actually we see that that ESOS as a wrapper on a piece of EU legislation is a reasonably thin wrapper, and that is meant as a compliment. And that for organisations that have got sites and businesses in the EU, actually, if you were to take the sorts of things that ESOS requires and to start collecting that information and start performing similar activities across those different countries, then that would put you in a very good situation in order to be able to comply with the local legislation. So just as an example, things like ISO 50001 compliance is going to be the same because that is written into the EU directive. 12 months worth of data is written into the EU directive. The requirements of the audits is written into the directive. So there are differences. However, there is also going to be an awful lot of similarity across those schemes. So again, our view is make sure you take those initial steps, don't panic, but actually think about this in terms of your EU operations as much as you are in terms of your UK operations if you haven't already started to do that.
Great, thank you, Henry. Another question here about DECs. So Martin, in section 6 of the ESOS guide, it states that display energy certificates are a valid compliance route, albeit partial, but states as one is required for each individual building, they are less suitable for large portfolios. However, if consumption data is collected by other means, can DEC assessments and advisory reports be used as representative site surveys to identify the opportunities?
No, the short answer is a DEC would be required for each individual building. You can't say that DECs are representative. So where there's representative data, you could get an energy audit, you could have a qualified lead assessor making those links, but the DECs are specifically for individual buildings.
Great, thanks, Martin. I'm conscious of the time, but we'll try and squeeze in a couple more questions. Henry, we've got another one. I know you've sort of touched on this previously, but someone's asking, to use ISO 50001 as a route for compliance, do you need to include energy use for transport, travel, etc. within the scope of the management system? For industrial users, the focus of the standard tends to be on fuel and electricity used in the factory.
I don't believe within 50001 that there is a mandatory requirement to do that, in the same way as there isn't a mandatory requirement that ISO 50001 covers your whole organisation. So you can implement 50001 at a single site if you so wish. However, when it comes to energy management, actually it is a sensible, ignoring ESOS, it is a sensible approach to include all of your energy consumption. Therefore, my strong recommendation would be, if you are looking at ISO 50001 for the organisation, that you include that within scope. And even if you are only looking at it for a division of the organisation or a site, then looking at all of your energy consumption, any energy aspect of the organisation is going to be a sensible thing to do. In the same way as within any management system, if you are including things, make sure you know what it is you're including, and more importantly, if you are excluding things from that management system, make sure you know what they are and that you have made an active decision not to include them with sensible reasons as to why you are not including them.
If I can just chip in, I mean, the point in whether it's ISO 50001 or energy audits or using a system like the Carbon Trust Standard or CMRs or whatever, the idea is that you can use those, you can take that bite-sized chunk approach, but you need to make sure that at least 90% of your total energy consumption is covered in order to comply with ESOS. So if transport is a major element, you could include that in one of those management systems, but it depends how you define the scope and the boundary of each of those different activities you carry out in order to comply.
Great, thank you, Martin. And just one final question here. Someone's asking, when will the list of approved professional qualifications be announced?
The aim will be this month. There was an initial round of applications which were due with the Environment Agency by the end of August. Around 18 bodies, I think, submitted registers for consideration, and including sort of all the major sort of bodies that you would spring to mind for professional bodies that would do such a thing and have those recognised qualifications in the UK and approaches. The Environment Agency are currently going through those applications and will be reviewing them, and like I said, I would hope by the end of this month there will be a list of whichever of those have been approved. There will also be a further round where professional bodies can submit applications up until December. But clearly what we've been doing, and we work very closely with major bodies beforehand, is to get them to get their applications in early to give that certainty to the market, and it's in their interest to do so, because then they will be in there from the start if more people are looking to get those qualifications and have had them to date.
Great stuff. Thanks, Martin. So we're out of time now, but I'd just like to thank Henry and Martin for their time today and for getting through so many questions, and also for everyone who joined us for this webinar. Just to remind everyone, a recording of the webinar and the presentation slides will be archived on the 2 Degrees platform, and I'll send out an email with the links to these once they go live. So I hope everyone found today interesting and useful, and that you'll be able to join us for future webinars in the coming months. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.